Welcome back, folks, to another edition of my WrestleRant video series where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views that I watch in the WWE Network. Next couple of weeks, I'll be covering every Hell in a Cell pay-per-view to date, including the 2011 installment, which I'll be talking about today. So kicking off the show was Sheamus versus Christian in their first ever one-on-one outing on pay-per-view, kind of triggering that long feud that they had in the fall of 2011. Really didn't have much of a story behind it. As I said in my 2011 Night of Champions pay-per-view review, they kind of just randomly had a segment together, triggered the feud for this matchup. A great matchup, a great opener, went about 13 minutes. You would think that they'd get about 5 or 6 minutes, but they actually got a lot of great time. Sheamus won all the matches they had in this feud, this one being no exception. But all the matches were very well wrestled. I enjoyed the feud for what it was. Christian rarely, if ever, got the upper hand over Sheamus, and it kind of made Sheamus out to look invincible, and that's when people started to get sick of him, and he was only a babyface for 3 or 4 months. So that wasn't the best way to go about things, but even still, though, it was a good matchup to kick off the show. Sheamus went over, like I said before, kind of a placeholder in the feud, as they would have another match a couple of weeks later at Vengeance. So that's the opener for the pay-per-view, kind of kicking off the show on a high note in terms of in-ring action. Up next, we had Sin Cara Azul versus Sin Cara Negro, Hunico versus the real Sin Cara. This whole butchered storyline was kind of rumored going back a couple months. When Sin Cara was suspended, they brought in Hunico with Sin Cara, who was actually ironically playing Sin Cara now. It's funny that I'm botching my words here because this was a botch of a match, and both guys are known to botch. It's pretty funny. But anyway, though, it's pretty fitting that it is what it is. But anyway, the match for what it was pretty good. I mean, it went about 10 minutes, but people just really did not care. This entire feud, people did not care about. They really had no reason to cheer for either guy. I mean, maybe Sin Cara Azul, of course, he was over, but early on, people really didn't know what to think. People were confused because they were both wearing the blue colors, and that's why I was glad they called him Sin Cara Negro and Sin Cara Azul. It made it a little bit better, but the feud overall was really a waste of time. It really did nothing to help Sin Cara whatsoever, the real Sin Cara, as he would get injured about a month later anyway, and he'd be out for the next 6 months. So really, this whole feud was a waste of time. It built towards that mask versus mask match, not at Vengeance, but the SmackDown before Vengeance in Mexico. So in that respect, it was good for what it was. Like I said, another placeholder match in this feud between the two Sin Caras. But the match for what it was just overshadowed by all this bullshit storyline that they had going into it. Was not really a fan of this whatsoever, especially since the real Sin Cara was still botching. Hunico did his best to carry him to a good matchup. Did not really have the chemistry that people thought they would. Was not a blockbuster bout by any means. The people in Mexico, the Mexican fans, when they went to SmackDown a couple of weeks later in Mexico, cared about the matchup, and rightfully so. But the people on the show in New Orleans really had no interest in seeing either of these guys wrestle. Sin Cara Azul wins, continuing the feud for the next couple of weeks until that mask versus mask match in Mexico, like I said before. Up next for the WWE Tag Team titles, we had Air Boom defending against Jack Swagger and Dolph Ziggler. Another impromptu matchup. Now, let me make mention of the fact, and I should have said this earlier, that this entire pay-per-view took place maybe 2 or 3 weeks after Night of Champions. I think 2 weeks. So there was really next to no time to build towards this pay-per-view, so a lot of the matches on this card were just kind of thrown together at the very last minute. This was no exception. It was a fun matchup. I mean, Dolph Ziggler and Jack Swagger were kind of a random pairing on paper, but they were both associated with Vicky Guerrero at the time, and it was kind of disappointing in the sense that, like I said in my Night of Champions review, the aftermath of that U.S. title match at Night of Champions when Ziggler retained was botched because Ziggler and Swagger teased tension on that show, and it really played no effect in the storylines after that. They were back on the same on the same page only a couple of weeks later, teaming or contending for the WWE Tag Team titles. So a very fun matchup. They would eventually have another rematch at Vengeance a couple of weeks later. So you see the whole pattern here of Hell in a Cell. It was really kind of a placeholder show for a lot of these feuds and matches and whatever. But a fun tag team match for what it was. Air Boom went over, still the WWE Tag Team Champions. Some people were disappointed that we did not get Zack Ryder versus Dolph Ziggler for the U.S. Championship, myself included. I thought that should have taken place on the pay-per-view and not on Raw, but in the long run of things, it really made more sense to hold it at Vengeance and later at TLC when Ryder would eventually win that title. But nevertheless, I digress. So a fun tag team match, but like I said, kind of thrown together at the last minute. A lot of people just didn't really care. But it got good time. That went about 10 minutes, so that's good. So up next week for the World Heavyweight Championship, Mark Henry defending the World Heavyweight title against Randy Orton inside Hell in a Cell. Now this was, again, much like many of the Hell in a Cell matches to take place at the pay-per-view of the same name since 2009, was really not in need of a Hell in a Cell stipulation. Mark Henry beat Randy Orton at Night of Champions for the World Heavyweight title clean, might I add. But what really about this feud stipulated the Hell in a Cell stipulation? Mark Henry was being built up as a beast. Great stuff. I mean, the only time I think he ever looked weak in this feud with Orton was when he got RKO'd by him on the SmackDown before the show. But other than that, the feud is very well built and building up Mark Henry as a dominant World Heavyweight Champion. So that being said, this matchup really did not need the Hell in a Cell stipulation. It was a good matchup. I mean, I thought it was better than their Night of Champions matchup, which was a little more on the boring side. It was solid, much like this one, but I thought this was the better of the two matches. Neither of them are five-star classics, but they made it work for what it was. They never really utilized the cell all that much, because like I said before, they did not need to, so that part of it was kind of pointless. Standard rematch with Randy Orton invoking his rematch clause. Mark Henry going over clean again, which I also thought was out of the ordinary. But afterwards, Mark Henry would continue to beat up on Randy Orton until Randy Orton got the upper hand by knocking him out with a chair and later RKOing him or something along those lines. Twice, I think. So Randy Orton got the last lap in the end, but it really didn't damage Mark Henry in any way because he was so dominant throughout this matchup and the rest of his reign as World Heavyweight Champion. Up next, we had an impromptu segment with Cody Rhodes, the then Intercontinental Champion, coming out, talking about the conspiracy against him, all this other kind of stuff. I can't remember exactly what he was talking about, but he was talking about being, beating Ezekiel Jackson for the Intercontinental title a couple months earlier, trying to restore prestige to that IC title, and that he did because it was on this show, one of the very noteworthy moments on this Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, that he unveiled the new, or should I say old, Intercontinental Championship belt, which was once what once was the classic IC title belt, is now the current IC title belt, which we've held ever since. So I thought that was pretty cool to bring back that old IC title inside the purple burlap sack or whatever he had with him. So that was a great touch. I thought Cody Rhodes, on the whole, was a great Intercontinental Champion. They kind of lost their way with him going into 2011. Was it? No, I'm sorry, 2012. But throughout the final few months of 2011, I thought they did a great job in building up Cody Rhodes as a credible as a credible Intercontinental Champion. And this was definitely a step in the right direction in bringing back that classic IC title. So he would be put in an impromptu matchup with John Morrison for that Intercontinental Championship. Cody Rhodes goes over in about a 7-minute matchup, good for what it was, but John Morrison was never really seen as a legitimate contender to the Intercontinental Championship. He was just kind of randomly contending for titles and Night of Champions. Now on this show, it was a good matchup for what it was, but that aside, though, Cody Rhodes goes over, still the Intercontinental Champion. Some people thought Morrison was going to win here and then get traded to SmackDown, but that never really came to fruition. Morrison was gone from the company about a month or two later. But anyway, Cody Rhodes still the Intercontinental Champion after that matchup. Up next for the WWE Divas Championship, Beth Phoenix taking on Kelly Kelly in the third and final matchup between these two. I mentioned in the Night of Champions review that the feud between these two really jumped the shark at the Night of Champions event only a couple months before this, or actually the month before this, in that Beth Phoenix should have won on that show. It took place, it emanated from her hometown of Buffalo, New York. She should have won the title on that show. She didn't. And by this point, people just did not care. The matchup was fine for what it was. Easily the worst of the three the two had on pay-per-view. But like I said before, people were ready to see Beth Phoenix win that title by Night of Champions. They waited too long. And granted, I know it was only 2 weeks later, but by this point, people just did not give a shit. They did not really react to Beth Phoenix winning the title. And it was ridiculous, too. They had Natalya interfere and beat up Kelly Kelly and act like she was raping her and some shit like that. It was terrible. And Beth Phoenix goes over, the new Divas champion. So I liked the outcome, but the match itself was very lackluster. Easily, like I said before, easily the worst of the three matches the two had on pay-per-view that year. And that was pretty much it. They would continue to feud for another couple more weeks, but aside from that, it was really a lackluster matchup. Too far, it took place right before the main event, so people just did not give a shit. Beth Phoenix should have won the title, Night of Champions. Not on the show, but at least she won the title at all. So going into the main event for the it was for the WWE Championship triple threat match between the then champion John Cena, CM Punk, and Alberto Del Rio stepping inside the cell for the very first time. A very underrated matchup between these three competitors. I thought it was great for what it was. All three guys have such awesome chemistry within the ring. I think that often gets overshadowed when looking back on this event. I mean, this was a very forgettable show overall, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I thought this was a great matchup. Went about 25 minutes, a lot of entertaining action. There was never really a dull moment in this matchup. And the best part about it was, I kind of thought John Cena was going over going into it. And the swerve at the end was not really for the better, and I'll get to that in a second as well. But all three of these guys kind of had an equal chance of coming out of this matchup as the new WWE Champion. CM Punk was somewhat still hot after the whole Summer of Punk thing. They wouldn't really kill him until after Vengeance when he jobbed to Awesome Truth. Del Rio had just lost the title in Night of Champions, and I thought, okay, they're going to take the title off of him and then put it on John Cena, keep it on John Cena for a while. That's all fine and dandy. And then they took the title off of him on the show. I mean, for Del Rio to lock Cena out and then beat up CM Punk with a lead pipe, that was innovative. It made Del Rio look smart, not like a cowardly heel. I thought that was great. But to have the title change hands again within the course of like a 3-month span, because remember, CM Punk won that title and Money in the Bank at SummerSlam, or in between then, John Cena won the interim WWE title. Del Rio cashed in at SummerSlam, won the title then. John Cena won it at Night of Champions, and then Del Rio would win it again here. I thought it was ridiculous. I guess WWE's logic, based off what the dirt sheet said at the time, was that John Cena, they heavily relied on him to bring in the ratings after Del Rio's reign did not bring in great ratings for Raw, but then why would you put the title back on him in the first place, especially given they would take the title off of him only a couple weeks later anyway, or a month later at the Survivor Series pay-per-view. So that really made absolutely no sense. Like I said before, though, great matchup. I like the ending with Del Rio making him out to look like a smart heel, but to have him go over, to have him win back the WWE title twice within a month span was ridiculous. Completely devalued that title, and CM Punk was the odd guy looking in that he was the one taking the pinfall in this matchup. He was the hottest commodity. He was the hottest commodity in wrestling at this time. He had to take the pinfall. He had to take the heat for it. So I thought that was dumb. Then shortly thereafterwards, Awesome Truth comes out, The Miz and R-Truth respectively. I almost said The Miz and John Morrison. The Miz and R-Truth come out, beat up the officials, lock the cell wall. Triple H for the, I think, not the second consecutive year, but like he did in 2009, he would get bolt cutters, they would open up the cell, and I think he would punch on Miz and Truth for a little bit before they got carried away by police officers or mock police officers, whatever. That was a great ending of the show, very controversial, kind of built into the next night's Raw, nicely considering the fact that the Miz and R-Truth were both fired at the time in storyline. But I thought this was a very good match, though, between Del Rio, Cena, and Punk. And the Awesome Truth ending was pretty controversial as well. But on the whole, though, a very forgettable show, much like most of these Hell in a Cell pay-per-views. Neither Hell in a Cell match was really in need of the cell stipulation. I know the ongoing feud between Del Rio, Cena, and Punk was kind of long-running, but that did not need the Hell in a Cell stipulation. I mean, that was pretty stupid. Henry and Orton especially did not need the Hell in a Cell to get over in this matchup, but that aside, though, I thought it was a good matchup for what it was. Or it was a fine show overall, but for the most part, a lot of these matches were very inconsequential. Sheamus and Christian, good match, and that was kind of the theme of the show. A lot of good matches, but in the end, it really did not matter, especially since we would get a lot of the same rematches at Vengeance, and a lot of the people who won I just did not care for. Good opener with Sheamus and Christian. We'll go over a brief recap here. Sin Cara versus Sin Cara, stupid match, really not all that great, not Sin Cara's best outing, and then again, how many good outings did he have in WWE, the original that is. Air Boom versus Ziggler and Swagger, fine match for what it was, really in the end, forgettable. Henry and Orton, solid, what it was, not a great match, I would not recommend you go back and watch it, but it was solid for what it was. Cody Rhodes and John Morrison had a fun impromptu matchup, but again, really nothing memorable. And I'll get to the only memorable moment from this show in a minute. Phoenix and Kelly, new Divas Champion crown, but again, no one really cared. In the main event, again, a great matchup, but in the end, Del Rio winning back the title was an eye roller for a lot of people. So the only memorable moment from the show, I would say, is Cody Rhodes bringing back that classic, that vintage Intercontinental Championship belt. But that aside, though, I would not at all recommend you go back and watch the show. I thought the 2010 and maybe the 2012 installments were definitely better than this one. So definitely skip this one when watching over the Hell in a Cell pay-per-views as we prepare for the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view only a couple of weeks, the 2014 installment on the WWE Network. So as always, folks, thanks for watching. Really do appreciate the support. If you want to support the show here on WrestleRant, you can like, comment, and subscribe. You can tweet me on Twitter at WrestleRant. Find me on Facebook, Ramsey Matthews. For any suggestions or pay-per-views you would like me to watch and review here on the channel, and I will hopefully get to it when I'm done with the Hell in a Cell reviews and all that kind of stuff. So once again, folks, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys next week.